Thank you so much, Karen, for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. I am so honored and so pleased to join everyone. And what a wonderful platform to network and connect. And it's a safe, shared space at a time like this when the world outside seems to be descending in a bit of chaos. So thank you. It's a real honor and a real privilege, and also to be sharing a panel with all these wonderful women. It's fantastic. Okay, without further ado, I will start today to talk about building a sustainable business. I'll give you an overview of Boom Grow, how it started, and the journey towards this company, and also a bit about myself, what led me to do what I'm doing now. And I will end a bit with lessons learned. If I know now what I knew then, would I still be doing this? So a little bit of sharing there. Okay, let me just get to the, just give me a minute. Is that clear?
Yep.
All right, okay, great. Okay, so Boom Grow, as Karen very nicely introduced, is a controlled environment farming company producing 100% clean and nutritious greens that you can trust. Our vision is to shape the global food ecosystem through our patent pending farming system. Now, in terms of technology, we use precision controlled farming systems. So what does that mean? Our current farming system, we use repurposed shipping containers to farm. So this is an overview of our farm in Ampang. And it's extremely efficient in terms of space. The dream is hyperlocal. Currently, a lot of production of food is very far away from where consumers live and shop. So for us to be situated right next to a housing estate is really the dream. And the whole farm to table ethos sits at the heart of what we do. And as we grow vertically, so it's a vertical farm, so we stack very closely our produce in a controlled environment, we are able to grow in -50 to +50 in terms of the weather. So we are not affected by the vagaries of external weather. And this means that basically the body of the shipping container can be situated in the deserts of Dubai or the coals of Kazakhstan. And that really gives you an idea of how transformative a farming method like this is, because we are then able to, when we're able to control weather, we're able to control the pesticides that affect the produce. And essentially our promise, that's how we meet the promise of no harmful chemicals and no pesticides. And a lot of this is today enabled through live monitoring systems. We use lots of perception technology, which really means sensors. We use artificial intelligence. We use even robotics to monitor and manage the farm. So we call this farming system the machine farm. And basically what it means is that with technology, we're able to control the inputs, light, water, electricity, and humidity, to then maximize output and production and meet the demands of the consumer. And the notification system, of course, enables us to track these farms from anywhere we are, right in our office in Kuala Lumpur, right? Okay. Now, the mission is to change the way people live, enabling access to nutritious, safe, affordable, delicious, clean greens that are sustainably produced for everyone every day. We want to connect the communities through health, well-being, and wellness, and also keep the planet in great shape. One of the not so big secrets about agriculture and food production is the impact on climate. And those vast tracts of agriculture, which are situated far away from the community, one is also largely fit for really the shipment and not so much consumption. So in order for this produce to be fit for shipment, there's lots of preserving chemicals, lots of other climate aspects, carbon aspects that come in. So those food miles that really was once upon a time seen as part of the wonders of globalization, today comes to a head in the light of COVID. And we are now aware of how fragile the supply chain is. this is an overview of the farm that we have. So it gives you it's extremely compact in terms of how we farm. And so a 40-foot shipping container is equivalent to about 1 acre almost of an outdoor farm. So that gives you an idea of how efficient some of the farming systems, this current farming system is. Why do we do what we do? It's simply because we are on the brink of a severe food crisis. Right. And if you think about your dinner plate today, you may not have, most of us do, but sometimes it takes some time to realize that actually it has huge impacts in terms of pesticides, biodiversity, water, fungi. So, you know, we just talk about pesticides, but sometimes you forget there's fungicides, herbicides, and a whole load of other toxic nasties. Runoffs which affect the biodiversity, food miles I've already talked about, low-skilled migrant labor. Now, by 2050, the global population will reach, hang on, can't seem to move, yeah. Global population will increase to 10 billion. There's a 70% increase in food, and that's also, this data is even more staggering in Asia Pacific because 2/3 of the global middle class will reside in Asia Pacific. Increase in population, increase in prosperity is not a good formula to have as we as the years progress. And of course, we know this 3-degree rise in temperature is going to lead to a very severe food crisis. Malaysia alone, 60 billion in food import, 60 billion ringgit, 5 billion just on vegetable import. And that is also something that tells us that we are not prepared for food security. Many Asian countries are not prepared for food security. Harmful chemicals, I've already talked about this, resulting in severe, our personal health, but also the health of the environment. Organic vegetables or vegetables free of pesticides are actually very costly, forcing the bottom of the pyramid, people who can't afford access to good produce, is really not available for most of the population, and that results in consumption of toxic food. The younger generation is shunning traditional farming, which is viewed as a sunset industry. It's an extremely unsexy business, farming. It's never seen as something, you know, you want to aspire. Young kids aspire to be, I don't know, bankers or coders. So it's really hard to even get young people to join traditional farming. And as a result, we have today over-reliance on low-skilled, lowly paid migrant labor. Not a good combination. And obviously COVID-19 has really put a spotlight on the fragility of our food system and how food production really needs to be honest, clean, traceable, and transparent. So that's the big picture, the data and a bit about Boom Grow. But how did I get to do this, or how did this get started? Was so there's 3 of us co-founders. I'm married to one, Murali and me, and Shan is a really good friend of ours for many years. So I spent a fair bit of my career advising companies after a PhD, advising Fortune 500, FTSE listed companies, spent some time in the hinterlands of palm oil plantations, high-tech manufacturing facilities, you know, seeing the next generation electric vehicles, F&B production hubs. So having seen it all, one of the biggest disconnect, and of course doing climate advisory and carbon environmental social governance assessments for so many years, such a disconnect between these large corporations and the policies that are shifting. They are doing a lot, but the people in these organizations go home and lead business as usual life. It's not, and we go into these companies and talk about how sustainability as usual needs to be embedded across the organization, but people just go back and live how they always live. And that disconnect was truly troubling, because I didn't want to think that I'm going to spend all my life doing this with no, there was no, that I can't say there was no impact. There was very major impact in terms of getting these large companies change, the economy changes, but that also gave me an awareness of the brokenness of the food production system and how food makes a difference. And of course, it's also very personal, because when you have children, and I think some of you are also, you know, educators, teachers in schools, and you know that you need, when you start feeding your children, you realize there's very little choices, and a lot of those good choices expensive, access to good produce. So was a major driver for my husband and me when we started. So he's a finance guy, very much numbers driven, focused on the numbers side of the business, and Shan, the other co-founder, is sort of a maverick designer. So in a way, we balance out and bring very interesting perspectives to the table. And I suppose that's built the company to where we are. Our sustainability principles, very close to our hearts, resides around produce, planet, people. Produce simply because we want to introduce trust and responsible, data-driven clean greens. For the first time, we are able to integrate technology. I would say farming is one of those last industries to have been disrupted by technology in a way. In finance and so many other industries, the technology penetration has been massive. But for farming, I would say it's just still early days, and vertical farming still super early days, even globally. So what have we been able to do though with indoor vertical farming using technology? Is not just trust, but we are able to have 365-day operations, stable supply and price, because we're not affected by the haze, a thunderstorm, or any of those weather situation. We have a huge plant usability, and this is simply because our produce doesn't spend days and days or hours on the cold chain. It's really it arrives to the consumer very fresh. Farm on demand is a service that we can offer because we can customize produce. And in terms of planet, it's very hyper local, is what I said. 95% less land, simply because we're so efficient in terms of stacking it up. Less fuel, there is because of the carbon miles that we are saving, and extremely water efficient. In terms of people, of course, the focus is on freshness, customized offerings, looking at next generation jobs, local ecosystem. The focus is really because the machine, as I said, is now the farmer. It's more getting all those iterations right. And we want our human capital to work on research and development, looking at next generation practices. And that's where the real human innovation should come, we see, in farming. And of course, today we farm in repurposed shipping containers, but we are able to integrate the system in various other spaces, which we are currently exploring. So work in progress, lots of work happening. Direct end to customer wasn't really an initial focus, because our initial focus was really a B2B segment. And the pandemic really helped us to accelerate the focus in end customers. We don't have enough production currently, so we are building another in-premises farm as we speak. So then we will be able to have more produce and more reach to customers. So where do I see the trends in terms of customers of today? We see that Boomgrow is just one company, but we see that with the shift post-pandemic, customers are increasingly going to require more, or expect focus on climate, focus on more natural and pesticide-free produce, all this, traceability, transparency. So these trends are really being studied, and we are definitely plugging into that aspect of wellness. And Malaysia, I think the study that shows that we are one of the most obese nations in Asia, for example, and that's just because of the consumption pattern. So more focus on wellness would be a key area to address. So that's sort of where the company is, and my background and what I've done. Happy to take some questions. But before that, some lessons learned, right? It's a long, I always say this, it's darkest before dawn. It took us a long time to get to where we are, because today we can say, oh, look, this is how we farm. And farming is one of those businesses. It's a company. And I see sometimes people raising funds with a PowerPoint presentation, and that's fantastic. But with farming, you have to actually be able to produce and grow. And it took us a long time, because we were very research driven. So I would say, like any good project, the lesson learned is that it takes you longer than you think it would, almost like another PhD, longer than that perhaps. But once you crack that, and because we are so research driven, and we've sort of explored all the other available hydroponic systems that are in the market as well. So we know, and that's how we developed our own patent pending system. I would say one of the key things here is that you need the team to be together and to work and the right people, the right stakeholders on the table, because in a way we are reimagining an industry. So it's also hard to hire the right people. Today, we just can't hire people with an agronomy degree. We need mechatronics, we need artificial intelligence. We've just brought in some guys who are, lots of engineers, designers. So it's a very, very different company from a very traditional farming company, I would say. The female founder factor. And I think this is super important. Farming is a very, I would say vertical farming, so I'll give you a subcategory. Even globally, it's a very male-dominated industry, and I'm one of the few female founders around. And it's a distinct advantage, I would say. Why? Because a lot of my consumers are women like me. I am, somebody who looks for what my children are eating and what are their, and I know the purchasing patterns, I know what their demands, I know what their pain points are. And that has made all the difference to the company in terms of how we reach, in terms of the authenticity, and absolutely super critical to have those diverse voices on the table. And I feel that that's Boom Growth's secret strength. I mean, we have lots of different secret sauce, how we grow and stuff like that, but it's also the people on the table and the fact that if everybody's, all these other brands that cannot resonate with the community, I feel like, what's the point? Right. Start them young. This is super important. We are, as a research-driven organization, we are working with lots and lots of researchers, and universities as well are very interested in working with us. And our ask is always that it's always collaborative, that we don't just work with one university. But I feel that university is a bit late in the day. We need to start them in school. A lot of our children don't know where the food is from, for example, and the impact on climate change, because they think food comes from plastic packages in supermarkets, simply because it's not their fault. These farms, a lot of the farms are situated very far from where they live. And with farming systems like this, it's in your neighborhood, it's in your space, and that makes all the difference. In fact, the dream is, if schools start having farms like this and children start learning about this, then we can really have a real solution around, or thinking actually around food and its impact on climate change. 30% of climate change carbon emissions come from agriculture, not other industries. So that's a very major drive for us to start them young and think about food and consumption. And that's it. Okay, I've got questions. I've missed the questions. Rebecca Finley. Okay, how do I do this, Karen? Do I answer?
Yeah, you can take.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just take the questions. How do you say, so Rebecca Finley said, how do you see encouraging more women to become involved with farming? See, that's what I said, the female founder. I'm not a farmer, and the farmer of today is the technology iteration. So it's this combination of what the technology can do. One of my super performers has a PhD in biotechnology. She's female, she's got a young child. And so I do see lots of women. We have lots of young women who are interested in doing this. And it's because it's becoming more of a research-driven role in terms of looking at agriculture, in terms of looking at next generation produce. Also, we do get lots of applications around IoT, women who are looking at IoT, artificial intelligence. So the kind of hiring that we do is really quite different from traditional hiring, and definitely start them young to get thinking about these areas. Inba, what effect would you say is the most effective manageable action that an individual can take for sustainability? There's lots you can do, but from a food perspective, it's really looking at your plate, thinking, asking where the produce is from, buying more local, a little bit less meat, just those kind of things. Asking those questions and voting with your wallet makes all the difference, and can transform the community, because then that you get more choices. The consumer ultimately gets more choices. And I feel that actually, even when consumers start doing this, even traditional farming will change, and that's the major difference. What has your been your drive to start this company? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, it's the disconnect I actually saw in terms of how large companies have integrated policies and how we feel that sustainability is not tangible. So with Boom Grow, it's actually very actionable sustainability, and I can see the impact. It's a long road starting a company and getting there and building the whole thing. It's extremely rewarding, but I would say that there are super challenging days. Every day is a growth journey. Would I do it again? I probably will. Are people are people with a master's in chemistry needed in this business in Asia or Europe? Oh, definitely. We always looking for all the sciences are super important for us. So yes. Julie, what challenges have you had to face or overcome in order to get where you are? Oh, I may not end the session if I start talking about the challenges. But one of the first things was to, in terms of the mindset with sort of traditional, people often think that it needs to be either or, like traditional farming or vertical farming. For us, it's really very much, it's not an either or, it's very complementary, it's very integrated, and it's those kind of mindsets that we need to really shift and break, especially with the regulatory agencies and governments to really start thinking about how different options for food production can really make a difference for the community. And on the flip side, the technology part of the government has been extremely supportive. So apart from that, the other challenge is human capital, because like what I said, the kind of hiring we do is quite different, and we have to train people from scratch and things like that. So, but it's a good problem. We have good human capital in Malaysia, but just getting that right mix has been a journey. Margaret, in your container for vertical farming, how big can the size of plants be, and what types of plants, vegetables? Yes. So as I mentioned, it's extremely compact, and where so usually the focus is on leafy greens, microgreens, herbs. This is the current focus. Of course, moving forward, we're looking at other sort of produce as well, but currently in commercial stage, this is what we have.
Oh, thanks very much, Jay. And I think if others have questions, they can put them in the chat, and maybe you can respond in the chat if you don't mind. I just would like to say, I think I'm really inspired by your vision and your commitment to this. I think Boom Grow seems like such a forward-thinking initiative, and it's really good to see that you're really embracing the hard issues, the issues of access, the issues of equity, and the issues of sustainability. And I think you really are tackling those head on. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you for having me.
Next we have, with a career spanning 43 years, 3 countries and 2 continents, the wonderful Maggie Rafi. Her experience, gravitas and presence, rarely seen or equalled in others. She's a leader who puts staff first. She's uncompromising in her pursuit of excellence, and she can error check your emails with the eye of an eagle. I have had the pleasure of knowing Maggie since I joined Sri KDU International in 2017. And in the short time that I've known her, she's had a hugely positive and unforgettable influence in my life. In my opinion, anybody that is lucky enough to have been touched by her and influenced by her is both privileged and blessed. There are some things that money can't buy. The Maggie Rafi experience is just one of those. And tonight we welcome Maggie. Look forward to hearing her words of wisdom. Over to you, Maggie.
So before I start, I would like to say how much I've enjoyed hearing Dr. J, and what a privilege it is to share a platform. The picture of the future that you described at the beginning is very scary when you're a mother of 30-year-olds and a grandmother. But hearing people like yourself makes me feel more positive for my children and grandchildren. And I hope that the kind of things that Boom Grow are doing will help to improve the world for them. And I feel like as an educator, we also have a responsibility. You mentioned starting them young. So I was scribbling down that we have to get you into school. We have to, you know, have our students hear about this. We have to have our students think about careers as farmers and not think it's what they imagine, especially our female students. So thank you for that. It was really inspiring. And I'd also like you to know that we do have an eco garden in our school. And before COVID, the students were very, very engaged with that and grew their own food and passed it on to the cafeteria.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent to know and fantastic. And happy to share with students. That's super critical that they start thinking about this thing. So thank you.
Thank you. So I'd also like to thank Woman Ed Mai for inviting me to have this platform. It's flown by. I can't believe I've been an educator for 43 years. And there are lots of people on this call who inspire me to every day. And I'd like to just give a shout out to someone who's registered and joined from the UK just to give me support, because she's been a supportive and inspiring woman in my life for quite a few years, and that's Indira Raj Mangal. So hi Indira, thank you for coming. Obviously, I've seen a lot of changes over 43 years in education. And this talk is really not going to be supported by slides. I prefer just to talk. So forgive me if you don't like just listening to people's voices. I'm going to divide it into two parts. It's partly about the changes I've seen in education. But the first part is really about the challenges that I've faced and how I've overcome them and got to where I am. And this much I know about being an educator for all of this time is no matter the challenges, it's the best job in the world. And the job that I do now is probably the best that I've ever done. And my job brings me fulfillment every day, despite the challenges. Some of the challenges, I think, are what everybody faces and are not just because I'm female. But there are certain challenges that females face in most areas, but particularly in education, I think, reaching the top positions. I think I'm not very unusual. I don't think I'm any kind of a superwoman, but I have got some relative success, and I've managed to raise 2 children and do my job despite the challenges. So I think the first thing that I would like to say to everybody is it's possible. It's possible for everybody and anybody if you want it enough and if you want to make a difference enough. There are 3 main things that I think have enabled me to overcome. And I'm going to tell you what the 3 things are and then use stories from my career and life to illustrate when I've used those strategies. The first one is choose fight, not flight. Except when you know you cannot win or when your values would be so compromised if you didn't leave. The second thing is persevere. Just keep going. And the third one is choose self-belief over self-doubt. I think for a woman that is the most important one. I even had to choose self-belief to do this talk. And I've talked to many people over the years. I can talk to 100 staff, I can talk to students in an assembly, but I still had to tell myself and have self-belief that I had anything worth sharing. And so I chose self-belief. Okay, so the first one, fight not flight. Let me give you some examples of when I've done that. It's really interesting because just about a couple of weeks ago, I was in a management meeting at school, and we were discussing an aspect of safeguarding. And we were talking about the attitude in Malaysia to corporal punishment and the fact that caning can sometimes be a natural part of parenting. And I was trying to illustrate that, you know, this is very contextual to time and to country. So I explained that as a child at 11 years old, I was caned in school because I'm of a generation when caning still happened in schools in the UK. And I was caned for fighting, physical fighting. And I said to my colleagues, it didn't do me any harm and I never fought again. And then they were laughing. And it made me realize what they were laughing at is that actually I've never stopped fighting. I just haven't got into physical fights. So that caning didn't really stop me from being a fighter. I think some of the things that I've had to fight against are down to accident of birth, gender, and one of those isn't actually from my career, but from my education. I grew up in a working class family in the northeast of England with very intelligent parents, but not very well educated parents. And they always stressed to me that education was the way to make your life better. So I was always very hardworking at school. We were a Catholic family, and at that time there was a grammar school system and a secondary modern system. So for those of you who don't understand that, it meant that children took a test at age 11, and those who were considered bright enough went to the grammar school, and those who weren't went to the secondary modern school. But in my area, there was only one Catholic grammar school. And so there were only a certain number of places for girls. So I took the 11 plus and passed and had the right grades to go to the grammar school, but there were not enough places for girls in that cohort. So I had to go to the secondary modern school. So I could have let that define me and made that make me not aspire to great things, but I didn't. I decided I was a big fish in a small sea because I was put into the class where all the most able students in that school were. And I carried on. I fought against labels. I was not going to be labeled because I went to a secondary modern school, and I worked really hard and did really well and went to the grammar school for my sixth form. The next time that I had to fight was as part of my career. One of the jobs that I did in the UK was to be an advisor, not a teacher, for Birmingham Local Authority in special education, language development in special schools. And I had to work in a very large moderate learning difficulty special school. So for those of you in Malaysia who may not be familiar, there were mainstream schools and there were schools for children with moderate learning difficulties and schools for children with severe learning difficulties. And this was in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And we had quite an influx of migrants, some of whom had very poor English, to be expected. they were just coming straight from their own country. And there was a terrible system of assessment which didn't recognize that children could be able, but just not have the language to show how able they were. And some of these children were put into moderate learning difficulty special schools rather than in mainstream schools. So I found myself as the advisor to a special school with children who I could see should not be in a special school. They should be in the mainstream. So I tried very hard and fought for people to recognize that these children should be in a mainstream school. But at that stage of my career, I didn't have the power to make a change. So my values meant that I had to choose flight because I couldn't continue and work and support that system. So I resigned and found something else. So that's what I mean by you have to know sometimes when your values would be so compromised that you can't choose fight because you can't win. I'm very glad to say that over the years, things have very much changed in the UK. And now children don't end up in moderate learning difficulty schools. And in fact, very few children end up in special schools because mainstream schools have much more ways to support both children with special needs and English as an additional language. The next time that I had to choose fight rather than give up was when I was a head teacher at Alperton Community School in Brent. And we had a wonderful school, but we had terrible buildings. We had a terrible environment. And I had to spend my whole time telling parents, and some people on this call will be familiar with this, that it's not about the environment, it's not about the buildings, it's about what happens in classrooms and how we can educate your children and make great lives for them despite the surroundings. But a program came up from the government called Building Schools for the Future. And schools were identified who would get additional funding from the government to have brand new schools. And I made the bid for our school to be in that program, and we were successful because the buildings were really, really dangerous in some respects. So we set out on this journey with the students, with the staff, of planning what our school for the future would be like. We were at the point of the students presenting to the local councillors what they wanted their school to be, when a man called Michael Gove stood up in Parliament and said that the Building Schools for the Future programme was going to be scrapped. So I had to go back to the students and say, this isn't going to happen. But we carried on fighting. I ended up on every news channel, the BBC, interviewed by Chris Shipp. We had a situation where a window fell out and thankfully nobody was near it and no students were hurt. But I immediately got the BBC in and we did a video interview and we just kept fighting. And the Building Schools for the Future programme was replaced by another programme and we did successfully get our new school. Well, we got the funding for the new school at the point at which I left the school. That was my legacy. And I've now been back to see the wonderful new school that was built there. When I was doing that campaigning, I was very touched that a young woman contacted me because she'd seen me on BBC News. And at that point, she was a children's lawyer in Birmingham, a real advocate for children. Her name's Maria Desmostenos. And she had seen me, and so she managed to get my contact. And she sent me a message reminding me that I had been her form tutor in Birmingham many years before, and that I had fought for her. She was a Greek Cypriot child, and she had got into a real scrape with a teacher because she was very upset and offended that the teacher, with no cultural knowledge or sensitivity, was talking about how wonderful it was to go on holiday to Cyprus just after there had been a lot of problems that led to Greek Cypriot families having to migrate to the UK. And she remembered that I had advocated for her with this teacher and stopped her from being excluded from the school because of how she reacted to this. And she said to me she wasn't surprised to find that I was still fighting for children. And that was a really wonderful thing that helped inspire me to keep going no matter the challenges. And all of those fights really have something that links them in common, and which mean that throughout my 43 years as an educator, I've been absolutely passionate about inclusion and equality. It means that now when children do entrance tests to join my school, I don't feel that they should be turned away because of one test result on a particular day. So I do everything to try and accept them. I also don't think there should be a ceiling on students' achievement by predicting what they could get based on a CATS test. That tells us what they might get, what they're likely to get. It doesn't take account of personal motivation, parental support, fantastic teaching. We shouldn't ever put a ceiling on children's possibilities. I think I have also applied this in terms of when I publish my results, I always publish A star and A together as a percentage, because I don't want parents or students thinking A is not good enough. And I always make sure that I highlight the achievement of A star to C, and even all the students who've just passed, because for some of those students, that's a real achievement. And I think we have to acknowledge their progress as well. I choose to mentor students who are likely to get all C's rather than students who are likely to get all A's, because I want them to know that getting C's, if that's what is great progress for them, is okay. I think another area of equality that I've learned from all of my fights is about what Katie said, putting staff first. And I think in my role as a principal in UK and here in Malaysia, I've always fought to get the best possible conditions, terms and conditions for teachers, and also the best conditions to teach, because that's the only way to put students first. And I would strongly recommend that everybody reads a book I wish I had had 20 years ago called Putting Staff First by John Thompson and Johnny Utley. Okay, so that was all about fight, not flight. I want to move on to persevere. And I want to start by telling you about some of my failures, after which I've had to persevere. And the first one comes with my A-levels. I managed to, in those days, the highest grade at A-level was an A, there was no A star, and the lowest was an E. I managed to get an A in English literature because I was really passionate about it. I put all my efforts into that and I had a fantastic teacher. But I got E grades for my other two subjects, French and history. So that could have been considered a failure. I could have not persevered, but I still managed to get myself a degree place at university. a teaching university, and I chose to do English literature and French. I wasn't going to let that failure in French define me. I decided I would do a joint degree and carried on with my French, which has enabled me to, during my teaching career, teach French and English. And I've never regretted carrying on with French. And it meant I could do my very last teaching term, because in 2019, term 1, I ended up having to teach year 8 French for the whole term because we had a runner and I was the only person in the school who could teach French at that point. Okay, then when I did my MA, while I was I did the end of my MA when I was heavily pregnant, and I did my whole MA whilst I was working full time. So I was a part-time student for 2 years doing my MA. And we had to do a dissertation, as those of you who've done an MA know. And it was when computers had really only just got going. And even now, I'm not that good with computers. But then I was disastrous. And I lost the whole first chapter of my dissertation because I didn't know that you had to keep saving. So I managed to lose the whole thing and it couldn't be retrieved. So I had to just do it again. And that to me is, another way that you have to persevere. And I use those things to teach others now, especially students. I tell them if they don't get the A-level or the IBDP results that they want, that it's not the end of the world. Look at what happened to me and look at where I am now. If they lose work or they haven't managed to do their coursework, then I tell them this happened to me and look where I am now. What the final one about failures is MPQH. I now have my MPQH, which is the National Professional Qualification for Head Teachers from the UK. And when it was first introduced, I was one of the first cohorts, and they did it really badly because we had to go to 8 Saturdays. We had to produce files and files and files. We had to do a final assessment, which involved actors coming in and making us do role play. We had to do a fishbowl discussion where we were observed discussing, and it was nothing to do with what you were doing in school. So it was all just extra work. And the first time I did the final assessment, I failed because I failed on one part. And that was the observed discussion. I was the only woman in this discussion, which was being observed. And apparently I did too much listening and didn't try to put my points across enough in the discussion. That was the feedback I got. And that's why the first time around, I didn't pass the MPQH. So again, I could have just given up, but I went back to one of my most inspiring women, which was my head teacher at the time. And she just told me to do it again. And I did. And that meant I could carry on applying for headships. So with all of those kind of failures, I think it's important just to tell people to continue to focus on the positive, to have another go, and to use your failure to encourage other people. The second area where I've had to persevere was actually to get a head teacher position. So my first head teacher post, head of school post, was in Alperton Community School, as I've already mentioned. Before I got that post, I was interviewed 12 times for a head teacher position, and very often got down to the last 2 and then didn't get it. I put in so many applications. sometimes I didn't even get down to the last two. And there were many occasions when I was going for interviews that I really did feel that I didn't get the job because I was a woman. And in one interview I went to, which was in a fairly leafy school in the home counties, the governing body had tea with the candidates, and a colonel, and it was a colonel from the army, a retired colonel who was a governor, was standing with me and some other candidates. I was the only female candidate. And it came to having the tea, and he turned to me and said, well, will you be mother? And I just said, I think I'm a bit overqualified for that, and walked away. So I didn't get that job, needless to say. So, I mean, I think as a woman, you have to have even more than a man would have to get the job. But you have to believe in yourself, and you have to show what you can do in as many ways as you can. And you just don't give up. You just keep on trying. Okay. Choosing self-belief over self-doubt. Katie knows that I am very bad at timing. So you need to let me know if I'm talking too long, and I will stop. 5 minutes, Katie? Yeah, thank you. So I'll move on to choosing self-belief over self-doubt. All of you women have got to hit that imposter over the head with a very large hammer every time it comes out. Don't let other people define you. Do not think that you're not good enough to do things. I have to tell myself this all of the time when it comes to maths. People who know me that I am not very good at maths, but I can do whatever's needed. This is because a teacher once told me that I wasn't very good at maths. And that's why I think all teachers should always be very, very careful what they say. And I failed my maths. I got a U grade, and I was the last cohort of people who could go into teaching without an O level in maths. So if I'd been 1 year younger, I would not be where I am today, because I wouldn't have been allowed to become a teacher. But I have taught myself what I need to know, and I know how to use other people. So in my job, I have to look at a lot of statistics. I have to do a lot of maths, and I can do it. And that's choosing self-belief over self-doubt. Choosing self-belief over self-doubt is taking opportunities, even when they're risky. So arriving at teacher training college as a failed A-level student from the northeast of England with a Geordie accent and a working class family background, I had to believe in myself the whole time, that I deserved to be there, that I could do this, that I could get my degree, I could become a teacher. When I'd been teaching for 3 years, I decided I wanted to do voluntary service overseas because I'd got bored in my first 3 years. I was not challenged anymore, which is very arrogant to say now, but at 3 years in as a teacher, I thought I knew everything and I wasn't being challenged anymore. So I decided to do voluntary service overseas, and the head teacher of that school pulled me into his office, and he said, if you do this foolish thing and give up this great job that you've got here, you will never get anywhere in the education system in the UK. Don't think you can go off, do that, come back and still succeed. Well, I chose to take the opportunity. I chose self-belief, and you know, he's passed away a long time ago now, that head, but I did go back and tell him what I did manage to achieve when I came back to the UK. I think I've always waited until I felt that I'd really cracked a job before I move on to the next one, which is one way to defeat imposter syndrome, I think. And when you start to have that self-doubt in your job, you need to think back about all the things that you've done before to get you to that position. You're never going to be in a position with a new job where you know everything, but you have to keep reminding yourself of what you have achieved to get to that point. I had to have self-belief in my first 2 or 3 years at Alperton, because I had 2 deputies who were undermining me under the surface. So I could have doubted myself, but I didn't. I just kept going with the right people and managed to turn that school from satisfactory to outstanding in terms of Ofsted grades. And finally, I had to choose opportunity to give up my lovely, comfortable 10 years headship in Alperton and come international to something that was completely new to me and completely different. And there have been a number of times while being international school principal that I've had to remind myself that I'm not an imposter. I do deserve to be here. I would be able to learn the differences between leading in Malaysia and an international school and a private school compared to back in the UK. So I think you never know really what is causing obstacles. I don't know how much has been because I'm female or because of the background I come from, but you can always choose how you react to things. You can't choose what happens to you. And not everybody can be as blessed as I have been to have, for example, a wonderful husband who's always put my career first and helped me and supported me. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has been fortunate enough to have the kind of parents I had. But what everybody does have is the control to how you react to things, to how you react to rejections, to how you react to failures, to how you react to anything that challenges you in your life and in your role. And so that's what I would say. Always choose fight, not flight, persevere, and choose self-belief, not self-doubt. Thank you.
I don't think there's anyone here who thinks you're an imposter, Maggie, at all. We're all in awe of your great wisdom and experience. There's a few questions in the chat. Somebody has asked where you are now. I can answer that for you. She's at Shri KDU International in Kota Damansara. Somebody else has asked, to what do you attribute your great fighting spirit?
Ooh. I think it's a multitude of things, but I think it is that very early experience of feeling something wasn't fair and not letting it hold me back or beat me down. I think also I've been given resilience by the support that I've had from various significant people in my life. And just a belief that things can be different and wanting to make a difference, especially for the young people that I end up being the leader of and the staff. Yeah, it just makes me want to fight to make a difference.
Somebody else has asked whether you feel that men suffer from imposter syndrome as much as women.
I don't. I think we shouldn't ever generalize, because, you know, obviously there are some men who have more feminine traits, and there are some women who can be very aggressive and not have any imposter syndrome at all. I mean, if you think of Maggie Thatcher, I don't think she very often had imposter syndrome. But I think that's when women have to, when they decide that in order to achieve, they have to behave like men. But I think men tend to think, if they have, for example, if a man meets a little bit of a person specification, they'll apply for the job. And they'll talk the talk and make it look like they can do everything. If a woman looks at a job specification, more often than not, if there's one thing on there that they think they can't do, then they might not apply. I do think that a bit of imposter syndrome can sometimes be a good thing, though, because otherwise you get too arrogant.
Somebody's asked what advice you could give to females who are ambitious, but are also trying to be a good mum and maybe feel a little bit of guilt about that.
Oh, well, that is the one thing that I regret, actually, in my career, is that I didn't devote enough. I never took any maternity, other than a couple of months maternity leave, I didn't take any career breaks. And I let myself feel guilty about being a working mum. And so in some ways, I didn't give my own children the attention that they needed. And I think that's probably a mistake, from thinking that I have to work harder and do more hours and do more things in order to achieve. But if I had my time over again, that's one thing I would change. I would say, Maggie, to be a successful school leader, you do not have to sacrifice your own children. You should have a balance. You should all have a work-life balance, and you must give the same attention to your own children as you would give to your work.